My name is Philippe Lacoste. I'm the Director for Sustainable Development in the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, representing here my President and my Minister, who did have to travel back to Paris, are coming back next week. I'm very privileged to moderate this high-level event about the synergies between biodiversity and climate change. Scientists constantly alert us to stop the loss of biodiversity and to fight climate change at the same time. A joint IPCC-IPBES workshop recently reported that these challenges must be addressed together. Responding to their call is no more an option. This call is for more commitment to put nature and climate at the heart of development models. Development, our societies cannot ignore its damage on the environment. And the coincidence between two major events in the international calendar, COP15 and COP26, is absolutely an opportunity we cannot miss. Transformative changes are required to address climate and biodiversity crisis. If nature is certainly part of a solution to adapt or mitigate the climate change, more commitments to decarbonize our world will undoubtedly reduce biodiversity loss. Ladies and gentlemen, the science is clear and the solutions are within reach if political ambition increases and private and financial sectors are more involved. All these initiatives, such as the High Ambition Coalition for Nature with Costa Rica, and the Leaders Pledge for Nature and People, and the Global Alliance, are essential to tackling all these challenges. France supports all these initiatives to send a clear message. Urgent actions are needed to halt biodiversity loss and fight climate change. This support is consistent with all the action my countries carried out in the international level, such as hosting the One Planet Summit in January and the IUCN Congress in Marseille last September. Through these initiatives, which contribute to increase the political leadership and the involvement of all actors concerned by biodiversity and climate change, we can collectively call these transformative changes. And we need to take the advantage here in COP26 in preparing also COP15. Without further delay, I have now the pleasure and the honor to give the floor to a champion of this subject, His Excellency Carlos Alvarado, President of Costa Rica. President, you have the floor. I think you have to join me here on the stage, please.
Thank you, Monsieur Lacoste, and good morning to everybody. Es un verdadero gusto estar acá. So, I want to share a couple of thoughts that I believe are relevant. One is how humans we determine reality. There's a legacy from a French philosopher, René Descartes, which is trying to solve problems by simplifying the more possible in a very rational way. So you can see that approach in how a couple of decades ago we started addressing the Convention of Parties, what we know as the COPs, which is a good approach. So we created the COP in terms of climate change. We created the Convention of Parties in terms of biodiversity, and also in terms of desertification and land. And that's an approach to addressing those. Today, when you think about those three frameworks, at the end of the day, from the other way of thinking humanity in an holistic way, we also understand they are all part of the same world, of the same reality, but seen through a different lens. When we talk about climate change, somehow at the same time we're talking about biodiversity. It's the same discussion. And somehow it's the same discussion about how we are going to feed the world and at the same time not destroying it and not destroying its biodiversity. So how we manage that complexity, how we intervene reality, acknowledging the different frameworks is one of the great challenges. So I do believe that having this discussion on COP26 toward COP15 is critical, is recognizing how interlinked they are. And we have seen that reality in Costa Rica. Let me put our example, which is a great example, and I know people talk a lot about it, that has to do with forests. And here, Carlos Manuel, my friend and my former Minister of Environment, we used to talk a lot about that. Well, he used to teach me a lot about that. We had a great deforestation in Costa Rica on the last century, mainly due to the production of beef and cattle, extensive production. So we were cutting trees to produce, to have production of meat. So then many visionary people started thinking ways to reverse it. Mario Bosa, we were talking just, and creating national parks and the other schemes. People at the time said, doing that is impossible, and doing that it's harmful for the economy. I mean, we are producing beef, we are producing agriculture, and that's more profitable than just having trees. That was the framework. So we were damaging the environment, climate. We were reducing the ecosystems for biodiversity, and we were not necessarily improving our production systems and harming our land. It ended up that what was thought to be impossible helped the free areas. We recovered forest coverage, and we fixed a lot of carbon back into the trees, into the land, into the soil. We recovered biodiversity. Carlos Manuel once, he gave me one striking data, because in Costa Rica, and Andrea can also give evidence of that, we have these cameras hidden on the forest when we capture biodiversity. So we started capturing, once again, jaguars, pumas, dantas, but lots of pictures of those animals, many of them that have their populations dramatically decrease. By recovering the forest coverage, we did not only fix carbon, we increased the ecosystems and the biomass increase. That means we recover again biodiversity, which also seems to be impossible in a world that we know has dramatically reduced the wildlife and the amount of species. The number of, for example, the data on mammals in the planet is striking. 96% is human and domestic animals. Only 4% or so is wildlife. That's a dramatic number. But this example tells that it is possible to recover biodiversity. So this is a great message here in COP25, heading to COP15. And I think that message of hope, which shows it is possible, we can see in other examples. The High Ambition Coalition is another great example of hope. Whenever I talk to anyone involved in it, I was talking to Alice, who was here in the room, and she's part of the team, and we have the same perception. 2 years ago, when with France and some other few friends, we were like 7, we decided, okay, we were talking in the pre-COP in Costa Rica, back in 2019, I believe. And we say, okay, we need to launch a high ambition coalition to go 30 by 30 by 2030. And you know what the noise in the room was? That's too ambitious. It's too ambitious. That's the way to say you're going nowhere. Everybody was saying that's too ambitious. Protecting 30% of your land and 30% of your ocean by 2030, too ambitious. But on the other hand, many were saying, well, the science, they were saying it's not too ambitious, it's what's required. It's what's necessary. So we said we're going forward with the High Ambition Coalition. That was 2019 in the One Planet Summit. It was officially launched. Boom. Usual suspects. But always with leadership of France. We were there, Costa Rica, UK joined. So the brilliant part, the part of the story that's so brilliant, it's that today, 2 years after that, more than 70 countries have joined the High Ambition Coalition, having great companies, great partners just like Japan, great partners throughout Latin America, and most recently having, for example, India joining that. So can you imagine how in 2 years, we had this momentum for change? That means it is possible. In this same room yesterday, another great example, we were joined here by the presidents of Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, myself representing Costa Rica. And we gather to build a commitment and to preserve our share of the oceans in this direction. We're talking about Cocos Island, Galapagos, key ecosystems. I mean, 2 years ago, that was just an academic idea. It was a dream. It was a dream 2 years ago. Now it's at the reach of the hand. And that is also driving another kind of momentum. Sorry if I'm taking too long. Another kind of momentum. In the last General Assembly, through the help of other parties, private parties, philanthropy, $5 billion were committed on supporting the conservation, the preservation of biodiversity. So, as we can see, the recoveries in the ecosystems that are real, if you let them recover, if you see that political commitment can drive momentum by joining other partners, if you can see political agreements become true, if you can see a coalition built with more partners and more commitments, you say there is hope that we can do this. We can do this. Change takes time. It's not that we are used to the concept of change very associated with capitalism, which is I'm changing my clothes, I'm changing my phone, which is something you do like that. Real change takes time, takes persistence. It's discipline. It's like an athlete. Real change takes commitment, persistence, and time. But here we are remembering why the High Ambition Coalition is so important, but also because it provides an example of hope, of commitment of different parties, and an example that it is possible to get things done. So my only request to the people on this room will be spread the word, spread the news, because I know there are also reasons to be concerned. But yes, there are good examples of why things can be done, how we can fix things. There are good practices. So my only request, humbly, is spread the word. We can make change happen. So thank you very much.
We thank you, Excellency, for your commitment and inspiring words. Now we will listen to the message of the President of Chile.
The unprecedented loss of biodiversity and the persistent increase in pollution are aspects of the environmental crisis that the world must face together. Global warming, caused by human activity, is one of the main causes for the loss of biodiversity. We must not forget that out of 100 species that ever existed, 99 are already extinct. We must work to ensure that the human race is not added to this sad list. According to the most recent report from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, almost 25% of all these species today are endangered. This means that over 1 million species are facing extinction. Stopping the loss of biodiversity requires us to stop climate change or climate crisis. Humanity is responsible for creating this problem, and we must also be responsible for mitigating or solving it. Protecting and recovering our ecosystem and their species, particularly the marine ones, is key to mitigate climate change through carbon capture. Our oceans and forests are powerful carbon sinks, capable of absorbing up to 2 times the amount of carbon they release. But in order to fulfill their role, they must be healthy. And it is our role to ensure that they are healthy. During Chile's presidency of COP25, which we dubbed Blue COP, we always emphasize the ocean's role as the biggest life support system in the planet and a core element in climate regulation. Within the framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity, we have underlined the need for a thorough representation of the ocean and its biodiversity on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, to be adopted next year during COP15 in Kunming, China. Chile has a strong commitment to the fight against climate change or climate crisis and to the protection of the biodiversity. And as a proud member of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, Global Ocean Alliance, and Blue Leaders, we are promoting the goal of reaching a protection of at least 30% of the ocean and land surface of the world by the year 2030. In fact, we are in the process of creating new protected marine and territorial areas, which we will be announcing very shortly. Chile already has over 42% of its maritime exclusive economic zone and over 21% of our continental territory under some level of protection. And our goal is to continue to push forward in this path towards protecting biodiversity and conservation in our country. Science has spoken loud and clear. The diagnosis is uncontested. We are heading in the wrong direction. But at the same time, technology provides us with the tools to amend our course, to mitigate and reverse at least part of the damage caused by years of atmospheric pollution. We must rise to the challenge. We must use all the means at our disposal, and we must do it now. Our sons, history, and the generations to come will judge us tomorrow by the action that we take today. It is in our hands to prevent the current climate and biodiversity crisis from becoming a climate and biodiversity apocalypse. Thank you very much.
Of Colombia.
We are currently experiencing the greatest biodiversity and climate change crisis ever faced by our planet. This situation requires urgent action and a strong commitment from all countries. Colombia is committed to increase our protected areas, including additional conservation measures for all our high mountain ecosystems. In addition, the Environmental Services Payment Initiative has secured a portfolio of projects that will benefit over 30,000 families and conserve 170,000 hectares of natural forest. These actions will significantly contribute to achieve our NDC established goal of reducing emissions by 51% towards 2030. These commitments are the reason Colombia hosted the Biodiversity Pre-COP last August on the road to COP15. As a result, we promoted a joint statement between three main coalitions. First, the High-Level Coalition for Nature and People. Second, the Global Ocean Alliance. And third, the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. Each of these coalitions has achieved significant milestones. For instance, we have advocated for a global commitment to protect at least 30% of the planet's marine environments and coastal regions. We have also discussed possible mechanisms to scale up nature investments and transform our current consumption patterns. Coordinated actions will unleash the potential of our determination as active member of these coalitions. We must ensure transformative action and introduce practical toolkits that will significantly benefit both our people and our ecosystems. Thank you very much.
We thank you, because as civil servants, we need this kind of high political support and vision. So now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, the CEO of Green Environment Fund. Please join us, and thank you for hosting this event in your facility.
Hello, thanks. Thanks so much, Felipe, Mr. President. It's a real pleasure to be here. How will the future will look like? The future will be digitalized, decentralized, carbon neutral, nature positive, pollution free, based on a right-based approach. And that is how the future will look like, because here in COP26, we were able to really connect many dots. And one of the most relevant connections and outcomes of this COP is, one, we will end, next week we'll end 27 years of endless negotiations, climate negotiations, and we will concentrate ourselves in implementation of climate action. And the fact that policy coherence, or the lack of policy coherence, continues to be one of the major challenges that we're confronted with. In this convention, and through the High Ambition Coalition, we have understood that all investments, public and private investment, should be totally aligned with the Paris Agreement and the new biodiversity framework. That means more coherence in the way we define policy and we determine economic decisions. If we do that, the global financial gap will decrease substantially. So the needs to mobilize resources will decrease substantially. In that future, which is going to be carbon neutral, nature positive, pollution free, based on a right-based approach, we most probably will not have a climate convention, a biodiversity convention, a land degradation convention, a convention on chemicals and waste. We'll have a global framework agreement based on the Sustainable Development Goals, where all decision-making processes in the public and private sector are totally aligned with that long-term aspiration of sustainability. And you know what? Everything began with the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, who brought together this concept of integration, this concept of dealing with the lack of policy coherence. This today is the day of climate finance. We had to have a good outcome at the end of these days on how we will agree to mobilize and invest $100 billion for climate actions. $100 billion is 7% of what we actually need to be on track for the 1.5%. How do we mobilize that 93% that we need? Well, stop and invest in activities that contribute to climate change and biodiversity loss. If we align all investment, public and private investment, with the Paris Agreement and the biodiversity framework, and with the neutral land objective and land restoration, the financial needs will decrease substantially. So the same way that I look into the future, a future where we have a global framework for sustainability, where we recognize that the Rio conventions really play a role, and now we go into a different, totally different scheme, I also see the same transformation happening at the government level, where institutions change. Instead of having a Ministry of Environment fighting with the Ministry of Agriculture, which fights with the Minister of Energy and Mines, we'll have institutions that works at the landscape and seascape level. And those are things that are going to happen. I'm extremely confident. And those things happen because we realize that integration and dealing with the lack of policy coherence is extremely important. Today, we humans invest 142 times more economic resources in destroying forests than what we invest in forest conservation. So it's not a matter of putting more money or mobilizing more money from the south, from the north to the south, or more efficiently at the domestic level. It's being more coherent in how we plan and invest. And I tend to believe that the Higher Ambition Coalition for Nature was a starting point for that revolution of change. I believe that COP26 and COP15 was the starting point of that very strong revolutionary approach where we will be able to live in harmony and in peace with nature. I will say that this coalition was great. And that is why, and that is because we had Alice J., Enrique Sala, Brian O'Donnell, and Rita Zaglul behind this coalition. I want to do a public recognition. I want to, congratulate all of them because they have been the mastermind on putting together these coalitions. They were the ones who put an image of a jaguar in a climate convention. I mean, for me, this is a very strong symbolic achievement to have the image of a jaguar in a climate convention. And yes, here we are at the pavilion of the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility, where we are working together here, and we're going to have a pavilion in CBD, COP15, both financial organizations, the most important relevant funds for sustainability. I don't talk about climate for sustainability. That means there is integration at the conventions, there is integration at the fund level, there is integration at the NGO level, there is more integration at the convention. But none of these elements can happen if we don't fully integrate civil society and non-state actors in the multilateral decision-making process. And I see that process already beginning, and the UN is being extremely supportive to begin that process of higher participation of non-state actors. Without the full engagement and role of non-state actors, without them, we'll never achieve those goals of sustainability, climate, biodiversity. So I'm really, really excited to be here. The GEF and GEF aid will be strongly supporting countries in the implementation of the new biodiversity framework and the 30%. We have an aspiration to provide up to $2.5 billion in the commitment to support countries in the 30% and in the new framework. So thank you so much, and congratulations, presidents, members of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez, for your inspiring words, and may I add how satisfied I am to see this common pavilion between the Green Climate Fund and your organization. This is a symbol and an effectiveness of integration of a different convention. Now I have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Mariam Almheiri, Minister of Environment and Climate Change of the United Arab Emirates. Minister, you have the floor.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much, Your Excellency, the President of Costa Rica, for inviting the United Arab Emirates. The word has spread all the way to our region as well. So we're really happy to be here and share with you also the efforts of the United Arab Emirates here at COP26 and moving towards COP15. So the alarming magnitude of biodiversity loss, as you've heard from the esteemed speakers, can sometimes come across as an afterthought in the climate process. And it is critical that we, as governments and stakeholders, rally around the dual purpose deliverables here. The 30 by 30 biodiversity target is perhaps the most urgent, and the United Arab Emirates is proud to be one of the first countries to endorse it in our region. Also, we are further honored to work along a growing and highly diverse group of countries. We are also part of the Global Ocean Alliance and also the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. Despite our different national circumstances, we have all concluded that there is a clear-cut investment case for biodiversity, and that loss must be tackled together with climate action. It is really a matter of survival. We are proud that in the United Arab Emirates, so far, we have 49 protected areas that account for 15% of our territory, and we are integrating the 30 by 30 into our national adaptation strategy and also in our strategic initiative Net Zero by 2050. Given that mangroves, we don't have the forest, but we have mangrove forests, capture over 1 million tons of carbon dioxide in the UAE annually, we have committed to planting 30 million mangrove seedlings by 2030 as part of our... Thank you. And this is as part of our second NDC under the Paris Agreement. We have also a big announcement on this coming soon that we will reflect our ambitious commitment during COP26 to strengthen even more our blue carbon ecosystems. So in our efforts to rehabilitate our natural habitats, tech-enabled solutions is also something that's coming along very strong. So we are actually using drones to dispense seedlings, and we have over the past few months dispensed over 6 million native tree seeds across large areas in the United Arab Emirates. The UAE has also implemented stronger fishing regulations, coral rehabilitation in order to help the ocean cope with the climate change. So even though we are a very small country, we are also putting a lot of effort because we really understand that we must keep nature as our allies in our actions towards climate mitigation. So all these measures not only enable adaptation, but also support growth, food industry resilience, and also job creation. So in this vein, the UAE is proud to have endorsed the Leaders' Pledge for Nature and committing to working with other nations to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, and sending a powerful message that there is no conflict between nature, conservation, and economy. Multilateralism, as we are here now, and congratulations on so many countries that have joined, is of course crucial, and the UAE has made an offer to host COP28 with the endorsement of the Asia-Pacific Group, and we will ensure that we will build on both COP26 COP15, and hopefully if we do win the bid, we will take this all the way to COP28. So with that, aligning our agendas for tackling biodiversity loss and climate change, it is the only way we can resolve them. And we take decisive decisions collectively to preserve our planet and life on it for future generations. So thank you so much again for having me here.
Now, again, we thank you, Minister, for your insights and your presence here today. And now I will turn to Mr. Yutaka Shoda, Deputy Minister for Global Environmental Issues of Japan. Please, Mr. Shoda, if you can join us on the stage, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. President of the Republic of Costa Rica, and distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to all of you for your dedication and commitment to holding this conference and for inviting Japan. I'd like to convey two messages. First, to halt the loss of biodiversity and put it on a path to recovery is important, even for increasing resilience against climate change. We need to reach an agreement on the ambitious post-2020 global framework at Part 2 of COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD. In addition to that, 30 by 30 is an important element for the new framework. Japan supports this 30 by 30 target together with all of you who are members of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. I sincerely hope that the importance of 30 by 30, which will be the foundation for nature-based solutions, will be shared among not only people that are working on biodiversity, but among many of those working on climate change. Moreover, we learned from the Aichi biodiversity targets that it is important to develop a new framework, including a robust process of PDCA cycle, so that the parties to the CBD steadily implement the national targets. Thus, it is necessary to develop an effective process through thorough consultation and the PDCA cycle under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. Second, to implement the new framework is important. Japan has already been working on its next national biodiversity strategy and action plan. As soon as the new global framework is adopted, we will swiftly proceed with putting them in action, including 30 by 30. Japan will also provide support to developing countries to facilitate their revising processes. Japan has contributed $60 million in total to Japan Biodiversity Fund, JBF. And as announced at Part 1 of CBD COP15, Japan will implement global support through a $70 million contribution. Additional contribution included during the second phase of the JBF. In addition, Japan, together with many partners, has also supported the Satoyama initiative, which promotes the sustainable use of local resources, including through the JBF. I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to the significant support for those activities of the Satoyama initiative by Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, GEF CEO, and look forward to further support. Japan will continue to contribute to 30 by 30 and to the realization of the 2050 vision for biodiversity, living in harmony with nature. I hope discussions among all of you will be a significant message from COP26 to CBD COP15. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And with that intervention, we have reached the first segment of our side event. I would like to thank, in your names, our distinguished panelists. And we will have a short video before the second part, which will be moderated by the Minister of Environment of Costa Rica. Thank you.
The time to act is now. These last months, we have witnessed historic floodings, record-smashing heat waves, and devastating droughts.
The urgency of action is clear. We must place nature firmly at the center of sustainable development.
We are now heading down a perilous path where millions of species, including humans, could face extinction.
The future of humanity depends on how we treat our common home and the other species that share this planet with us.
These green pictures remind us how much our well-being depends on how we treat our ecosystems.
As we seek to recover from the pandemic, we must focus on new ways to heal and make our mother planet healthy.
If we're going to turn the tide on this, then we need to get the whole world on board.
There is hope. We can and we must make peace with nature.
Norway is taking action to prevent the loss of species and ecosystems.
Bhutan is taking action to remain carbon neutral.
Belgium is taking actions to protect 30% of the oceans by 2030.
Colombia is taking action.
Romania is taking action.
Fiji's future will be nature positive and carbon neutral.
Sweden is taking action.
The United Arab Emirates is taking action to sustain biodiversity and natural habitats.
Gemeinsam werden wir den Verlust der biologischen Vielfalt bis 2030 umkehren.
Together, we can secure an equitable, nature-positive, net-zero emissions world.
We recognize the urgent need to direct global financial flows towards outcomes that benefit nature.
Together,
we will reverse
biodiversity loss by
2030.
The time to act is now.
And thank you to our panelists here. Now we will continue. We just heard all the vision from the leaders, the presidents, the ministers. We will continue here addressing this great momentum to see this interconnection between biodiversity, climate change, land degradation, and we have here representatives from the science part, governments, indigenous people, donors. So this is the combination that we need to really make things happen. So I will start right away with Enrique Sala. Enrique, from National Geographic, a champion in ocean conservation. Enrique, what are the key priorities your organization feel are crucial in the lead up to COP15 for action in nature?
Muchas gracias, Andrea, ministers, dear friends. So since I am the scientist on the panel, maybe I should start by reminding everyone why we're talking about nature in a climate COP, right? And if we are going to get to net zero, we need to do two things. One is to reduce our emissions to almost zero. And the other one is to absorb, suck up much of the excess carbon pollution in the air and the ocean that we have thrown out there, right? And like my friend Carlos Manuel Rodriguez says, we have the technology to do this, to suck up all this carbon dioxide. It's called trees, forests, wetlands, mangroves. There is no man-made technology that can absorb carbon at scale. It doesn't exist, right? But nature does it. The problem is that the nature that we have today cannot absorb our impacts any longer. This is why we need to increase protection of the existing ecosystems. We cannot cut more wild forest, old-growth forest. We need to also restore what we have cut. We need to restore the mangroves. We need to
protect the ocean so it can restore itself. Because the more biodiversity there is, the more nature there is, the more it can absorb our impacts, the more it can absorb carbon dioxide. And the science is very clear. How much intact nature we need? We need half of the planet in its natural state. That's the only way that we will be able to absorb enough carbon so we can get to net zero. Cutting emissions alone is not going to do it. CO2, the CO2 that is in the atmosphere, is going to be there for 1,000 years. So the warming would continue even if we stopped emitting carbon today. So this is why it's so important that we have 30% of the planet protected as a milestone to that half. President Alvarado said that when we met at the COP in Madrid and the pre-COP in Costa Rica, conservation groups and governments alike said, oh, this is too ambitious, right? This is too much. No, actually, this is not enough, right? So what can we do? And we all know the risks, because destruction of nature means more CO2 into the atmosphere and less ability of our planet to absorb our emissions. And today, 55% of the global GDP depends on the ecosystem services, the services provided by nature. Now, what can we do? National Geographic Society, with our friends and partners at the Campaign for Nature, are going to continue advocating, making the science-based case for 30 by 30, continue advocating for indigenous peoples' rights-based approach to conservation, and also continue advocating for not only the policy coherence that Carlos Manuel is talking about, but actually the financial needs, because what we need to fill the gap to ensure that we preserve our life support system is less than 1% of the global GDP. Today we spend $11 million per minute subsidizing fossil fuels. That's $6 trillion per year. We need only 10% of that to be able to support our life support system, right? The money is there. We just need to use it for the right things, right? And at National Geographic Pristine Seas, we will continue working with local communities and indigenous peoples and governments to create marine protected areas, supporting your efforts, Andrea, and Costa Rica's to create protected areas like we're doing with Colombia, and working with Inuit communities and First Nations in Canada to create a new series of indigenous marine protected areas in the Arctic. So that's how our two organizations in particular, and I think this is how nonprofits and scientific institutions can support the government's efforts in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Enrique. Okay, after listening to the science that, okay, the 30 by 30 is just the initial milestone to this pathway for a nature-positive world and a carbon-neutral world. But we need to work with the local communities. We need this rights-based approach. And we have Hindou, Ibrahim here. Hindou, thank you for being here. Such a great leader, women leader. And yes, when we're talking about these livelihoods for indigenous communities and local communities, let us and talk about this integrated approach of nature and climate. How do you see it? How do we continue working with indigenous people to achieve these global goals?
Sure. Thank you very much, Andrea. It's so great to see you. And Excellency, it's also a great pleasure, colleagues. So, you know, for indigenous peoples, we always ask this question. We say it's so cool to see the head of state finally they understood that nature is part of the climate, and protecting nature can protect the humanity, because that's all the way of life of indigenous peoples. We didn't get convinced to know that. We already know that. We already shout that. And then finally, they get understood. Secondly, we ask the questions. We say it's very ambitious for many governments to say, we are saving 30% of the world's biodiversity. Yes. But as indigenous peoples, we ask one question. We say, we're already protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity. This 30%, is it going to come from the 20% remaining or from the 80% that we're already protecting? So the numbers are nice, but we need to match the numbers on the ground. And if we wanted to achieve the goals that we have here, to protect peoples and planet from the devastating climate impact, and we restore the biodiversity in order to live, the planet live in balance. So we need to match the numbers on the ground. And matching the numbers on the ground, that what indigenous peoples do, does, we will do it forever. And we will do that without anyone asking us. We do that as our duty, because our livelihood depend from the nature. We do not eating or drinking from the technology that's coming from somewhere else. We all eat and drink from the soil, what soil gives us. And soil is an entire ecosystem. The rain comes, the wind comes, the crops grow up, and we eat, and we restore. So how the other peoples can learn from the indigenous people's way of living to restore the nature. And then we can see if we wanted to put 30% or not. So we believe that we must to all work together to increase what is 30% mean for us. We wanted to have increased the 80% of indigenous peoples plus another 30%, so we can make it 110. Maybe I'm wrong. 30 plus 80 is not the right number. So that's what we wanted to talk about it. And as indigenous peoples, we are offering that. You talk about numbers. We talk about the reality on the ground, about the implementation. Maybe the report are important for some people who know how to read, how to write. But for us, it is more important when we see the reality of restorations of the land, territories, resources, our people living back in harmony with the nature. They are not fighting to get access to the resources. Our forests are producing the food that we need, the shelter that we need. And it is not only the economy, but it is the peoples living all together. And for that, of course, we need the finance that we talked about it earlier. I'm very happy to hear the head of state talking about the pledges that are coming. And also yesterday, we had the pledge for indigenous peoples. It's so nice to have the pledge. I say that, and of course I borrowed from many other already said. I do not believe on love. I believe on the proof of the love. So it's nice to say we prove, we give you these billions, those billions. We all know the 100 billions that we have under the climate conventions. It was so nice. We clap when we say 100 billions is coming. But how much we got in the tables? We're still fighting to get it in. So we wanted to have the pledge, yes, but we wanted to have the proof of those pledge to put the cash in the tables. And in this cash, we don't want to have it ending in somewhere else. We want to have this cash go directly to our communities on the ground that protecting the biodiversity in every single day. And this money to go there, it is the money who have to adapt to our indigenous communities. It is not the indigenous communities who have to adapt to the criteria, the complex criteria of accessing to funding. So that is all about this pavilion. So if the GEF, Green Climate Fund, can have the mechanism to adapt to our peoples, and if the donors who are giving them the money can understand, our communities cannot fill an Excel sheet or thousands of reports because they've done an activity, but they are engineers of the nature. They have PhDs of protecting of nature. So they can do more better than filling a report or giving the Excel. So that's what we are offering in this nature and biodiversity and climate protection. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I wrote that we need to match the numbers on the ground. And this is a perfect bridge to Aileen Lee from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. So we're seeing the role of mobilizing resources and what philanthropy can do to catalyze more action in the lead up to COP15. and listening to what can we do to support governments, to support communities. What's the role of the philanthropy community?
It's exciting to see the role of nature in climate finally being recognized, but in many ways, like Hindou was saying, it's not enough, right? To say that we need nature to avoid catastrophe and get to a 1.5 degree pathway isn't enough. And from my perspective, raising ambition to protect 30% of the planet by 2030, as you were saying, it's also only a number. That's not enough. It really has to be about building the world that we want. And that's about a world that leaves space for the places that sustain and inspire us, a place that has respect for the connection between people and place and the stewards that have long guarded these places. And it's fundamentally about leaving our kids a world of renewal and abundance rather than loss and scarcity, right? So when I think about what the High Ambition Coalition stands for, it really is mobilizing the ambition to get us there. And my hope is that philanthropy can really be part of enabling and amplifying that ambition, right? I see our role as hopefully creating space for ambition by investing in the capacity and tools that governments and communities need to be able to envision what their futures can look like and really start putting those plans in place. I see it as being the risk capital that allows for the innovation, right, that can find us new solutions. For example, bringing together blended financing mechanisms that bring philanthropic, public, and private capital together to unlock the resources that we're really going to need to invest in. And finally, it really is about, as Andrea was saying, mobilizing resources at an unprecedented scale. Because really, as countries rise to the ambition, we need to be able to demonstrate that we are going to be there to help them realize that vision. In the last year, we have made new commitments to support Legacy Landscapes Fund and Enduring Earth, both projects that are really geared towards mobilizing conservation financing to support countries that have led and made these commitments. In addition, I think President Alvarado earlier talked about basically how we have to be willing to follow our hope and collectively get to the world that we want. And really, it was in that spirit that we joined with many other philanthropies to announce what he referenced as the $5 billion Protecting Our Planet Challenge. From our perspective, that was really a down payment on what's required. And our hope is that it touches off a virtuous cycle of ambition, right? Where countries and leaders can feel confident that raising ambition brings resources to the table, and where resources can demonstrate in return that we can keep raising the ambition. I can happily say that we're already seeing other donors wanting to step forward because they've seen the ambition represented by that pledge, and I'm hoping that that's just the start of more to come.
Thank you. Thank you, Aileen. Building the world that we want. Great. It's a great phrase. Thank you for that. And our leader here, Lord Goldsmith, and seeing the vision of the governments and also a global leader. Lord, thank you for Goldsmith. Thank you for being here, Zach. Where do you think a joint approach across all these platforms, because we're working together, it's about working towards the conservation of nature and the climate crisis. So we have the HAG, the Global Ocean Alliance, the Leaders Pledge for Nature, and how can these coalitions can add most value, and what specific actions do you think the three coalitions should take to deliver the priorities in the joint statement?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And it's appropriate that you should be doing this interview given the leadership of Costa Rica. I mean, Costa Rica, I don't think I've been at a single event where I haven't talked about how amazing Costa Rica and Colombia are. Two countries of real high ambition, doing extraordinary things. So I don't want to repeat what's already been said. I think the argument's been made pretty clearly. not just on this panel, but at COP, that there is no pathway to net zero. There's no believable mechanism for staying within 1.5 degrees that does not involve really unprecedented efforts to protect and restore nature. And I agree with Hindou, it's the 30%. That is the target that politically we felt that we could push for. We're not there yet. We've got about 120 countries signed up. But ultimately, of course, we need to protect 100% of this planet, the only planet that we know can sustain us. So this is a step. This is not an end point. It is a step on a journey. But it goes much further than that. Nature is a solution to climate change. We know that. But it's much, much, much more important than that. When you destroy natural systems, you destroy the free services that nature provides, which every single one of us depends on with every breath we take, with every mouthful of food we eat. And it is, on the whole, local communities, vulnerable communities, poorer communities, indigenous communities, who are most directly dependent on those free services. That is what directly sustains. And therefore, when you destroy nature, you create poverty on a scale which is unmanageable. So it's much more than climate change. Investing in nature, supporting nature, restoring nature, tackles climate change, poverty, pollution, and even, as we now know, pandemic. So it is really, you know, the economists have a hideous term they use, solution multipliers. But that is what nature is. Nature is the last word in solution multipliers. And that's why we decided when we got the presidency of COP to put nature at the heart of our approach domestically, but also internationally. And I had the honor of being asked to make sure that happened. And I do think, thanks to some of the people I can see in this room, civil society, but also civil servants, who have been, one of whom's just joined us over here, Andrea, who really ought to take a bow, along with many others who've worked unbelievably hard against the odds, pulling huge rocks up hills, dragging reluctant countries to the table, getting big financial institutions which really didn't want to have to make the commitments that were made, but eventually felt pressured to do so. And I think what was delivered yesterday, there's a big if I'm going to come to in a second, but what was delivered yesterday represents, I think, a turning point. Nature is not the second-tier issue that it always has been. It's not, you know, if you think that until now 3% of international climate finance has gone to nature, that has changed. We know that's changed. Nature now has the status that nature deserves at this COP. The finance pledge from governments, the finance pledge from the private sector, thank you, from philanthropy, thank you so much. The specific finance pledge for indigenous people of nearly $2 billion, most of which we hope will be spent enabling indigenous communities to legally assert their rights to the land that is already by rights theirs, but that is not recognized, as we know, and indigenous people are often simply cast aside in the interest of mines and deforestation and dodgy contracts and concessions. So we hope we can begin to change that, but to do so quickly. We have, the finance, I think, is impressive, but alongside that, because the finance is not enough, we all know that we could quadruple what we secured yesterday, and it still wouldn't compare with the damage that is being done by conventional money being invested in destruction. So we know that, which is why we focused on the systemic changes as well that we know we're going to need. Enric talked about the coals, the fossil fuel subsidies, there's land use subsidies as well. Every year, the top 50 food-producing countries spend around $700 billion subsidizing often highly destructive land use. And you talk to scientists, maybe Enric will correct me, but you talk to scientists, you tend to hear that the cost of returning or putting nature on a path to recovery is around $700 billion. It is a coincidence. How am I going down? But there we have it. If we could persuade those countries to shift the way they're using public money so that instead of degrading the public good, it supports the public good, that would be a pretty massive start. Yesterday, I can't say we delivered that commitment. We got lots of commitments around that theme. But we did get commitments from the world's biggest financial institutions representing around $9 trillion of assets that they will reconcile their portfolios, their assets, their investments with nature. We had a commitment yesterday from the big multilateral development banks, including the World Bank. And it required a lot of heavy lifting to get them all on board. And I'm so grateful again to everyone who was involved in that. They have committed to reconciling their portfolios, not just with Paris, but with nature. Those two things, in particular the latter, could... I think so. I think that is it has the capacity to shift the market towards nature. And we've had other commitments as well. Today, I've just tweeted, if anyone wants to see the commitment by the big 10 commodity buyers, the biggest buyers of commodities in the world, who are committing to doing their bit to breaking the link between commodity production and deforestation, responsible for nearly 80%. So that is also a big deal. And that is one of the reasons why those reluctant countries, the last ones to sign up to our pledge yesterday, and we got 120, it was nearly 130, there's a few more to be announced very shortly, 130 countries. Some of those countries joined not because they had an epiphany, not even because of the pressure from us or you, but because they see the market signals, and they know they're going to lose their market if they don't get with the program. So it feels to me that collectively, these commitments that were secured yesterday are more than the sum of their parts, with each part reinforcing the other part. And it feels to me, therefore, that this is a lot more real than declarations we've had that have been made in the past, signed up to, and then missed. I think it'll be much, much harder for businesses, multilateral development banks, financial institutions, countries to not do what they promised to do yesterday. But the if that I mentioned earlier is, we've got to make this stuff work. A promise is worth nothing until it's delivered, as Hindou said in her very, very powerful opening remarks. So all of us, government, of course, not just for the year that we host or presidents of COP, but forever, and you, civil society. We've got to put as much pressure as we possibly can every single day until those promises are met.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach, for giving this status to nature in this COP and for all the work that you're doing as COP presidency. So investing in nature is the best investment we can do. It has been a very inspiring panel. Thank you all. We have been hearing science. We have been hearing the indigenous communities, the philanthropists. Thank you for all. I know we have been hearing 55% of the global GDP depends on high-functioning ecosystems. So it looks very simple. We need to do a lot of work, but I think we're just starting this trip together, and we will continue working together. So thank you all for all the work you're doing in your different scenarios.